Would you like to pick some trains for me to run in a future running session? If so, then stay tuned and find out how you can get involved. Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome back to another episode of Track Talk. Today we've got 4 topics to cover. The first of which is making some ivy to grow up the retaining walls behind me. Then I'll look at designing and printing some spacers to help us set the spacing on sleepers on our track. Then I will talk about a couple of YouTube channels that I've been watching recently that have been particularly inspiring. And then finally, how you can get involved picking some locos for what I'm hoping to be a future running session. So let's get stuck right in and think about ivy. So on the retaining walls right here behind me, they're looking a bit plain at the moment. Therefore, I was thinking of some ways that we can make them a bit more interesting. One plant that is very common here in the UK and indeed across the world is ivy. And I thought ivy would make a great addition to those retaining walls to kind of break them up and add a bit of interest. So before we get stuck into building some ivy, I think it's worth just taking a moment to reflect on the types of ivy that you find, particularly here in the UK, and how you might then start to model that. Now, there are actually quite a few species of ivy globally, but in the UK there are 2 native species. There's the common ivy and then the Atlantic ivy, and the Atlantic ivy being found kind of more in western regions of the UK. So there are plant species that are very common in the area that I'm modeling. And also, if you actually take a look around you, there are far more examples of ivy kind of in urban and semi-urban settings than you might first appreciate. I'll pop a photo up right now, which was something I spotted just kind of walking through Newbury recently. It shows that ivy's pretty invasive as a species. Here you can see that it's crept all along the floor, up the tree, and will kind of climb up walls and anything else like that are nearby. So it's quite a kind of a useful species to be able to model, and would certainly fit right in on the layout here. I went and looked at some videos for different approaches for making ivy and kind of drew together a few different sources on the best way of doing it. But I think the common thing across the UK species of ivy is that the leaves are dark green, they are quite thick, and they will kind of blanket cover areas as you have seen in that photograph. So they're the things to keep in mind as we go through the process. It's also worth noting that in established ivy, the branch structure underneath the leaves, which we don't see a great deal of, it can also become quite pronounced and quite prominent. And therefore, that's something, again, to be mindful of, again, as we go through the modeling process. But anyway, let's move over to the workbench, and I'll talk you through the process that I've used to create some for the layout. This is a technique I saw on the scrap line. So it's going to involve some green polyfiber from Woodland Scenics. So we're going to start off by painting that brown. This is going to be the main substance to the ivy. So to do that, I'm going to put some of this burnt umber acrylic in here. I'm going to make a real squidgy noise. Oh no, that's not too bad. And then I'm going to water that down, so then we can dip some of this in it and hopefully get that nice and brown. So, made an absolute mess already. I made an absolute mess just stirring some brown paint into some water. So just be careful if you do that. Leave that to one side for a second. So our polyfiber. So the idea is to create some ivy that's going to drape down over our retaining walls. Now they're quite tall, therefore I'm going to want to pull this out into quite a long length. We want this nice and thin. You can see, I don't know if you can see very well on the camera how thick that is. It's kind of quite a thin layer. So you're kind of pulling it out into a bit of a sheet like this. Let's go with that as one bit. And then just keep working it out. Now, ivy gets absolutely everywhere. I know that from various gardening jobs I've had to do over the course of my life. So let's just create lots of kind of bits, kind of different sizes and shapes, because ivy will literally carpet everything it finds, go in all sorts of directions. And okay, so we've got 3 very different pieces there, which is good. Okay, so next job is just dunk them in. Let's see how that turns out. Wearing gloves is probably a good idea. I'm going to get that all squidged up. Okay, that's soaked up most of that paint by the looks of that on one piece. That which is not what we wanted. As you can probably tell, this is the first time trying this. Therefore, results are not necessarily as good as you might expect after a couple of goes. Let's just give that all a big mix around and just see what we end up with. And then I think I'm going to find a pair of gloves before I start picking this out, in fact. So these gloves are quite rustly, so apologies for that. But it does mean I can just get in there and just really get all of that coated in the paint. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, if there's some green showing through at the end of the, because we are just going to put green leaves over the top of it. So you kind of end up with this very kind of soggy mess at the end. So let's just pop that onto, let's just take that out onto a bit of card and let that dry off. So I will just do that now. You want to make sure that doesn't stick to our paper as it's drying, so we might just have to come and adjust that. Next bit, how's that looking? Now we've got the gloves on, we can just give that a good old rub and get that paint in all of those bits, and then again just kind of tease it apart again, so we've got this very loose structure. Okay, so 3 bits of ivy. We'll just let that dry, and then we'll come back with the next step. What I've done is taken a couple of those bits of polyfiber that you saw me painting up, and just put them, trim them down and put them in place in a couple of places on the retaining wall. Just have a look at how they look. They've been there a couple of days and it feels like they're in the right places. So what I'm going to do now is take those off and get the leaves put onto them. So that's what I'll do next. Just to note that by the time that these fit on, they will be a lot tighter to the wall, so they don't look great at the moment, but they will do when we get the leaves onto them and them stuck on. But let's get them off there and get on with the next stage. And as you'll have seen me do on other videos, I'm just going to give this outer edge of the polyfiber, now it's been painted, a good dousing in PVA. As you'll have seen from the photos, ivy really does thickly cover things, so we want to get a nice thick cover of PVA on there so we get a nice cover of leaves on this one as well. I will, as with other things I've done, we'll come back with a second coat with some layering spray or some spray glue of some kind, hairspray or something like that, just to get a bit more of a coat if things don't stick. And then exactly as you've seen me do before, good sprinkling over that. I'm trying to get a nice thick covering of leaves. Okay. And then what I'll also do is blast that with a bit of layering spray and just add another coat over the top. This really does give us a nice thick coat, the way you'll have seen in that photo. But ivy really will take hold and the leaves will be quite thick. Okay, that looks good. What I'll do is I'll let that dry. I'll blast over that then with some lacquer varnish spray just to seal all that in. Then we can take those back over to the layout and offer those up. And then get a pair of scissors out and just kind of trim things to make them look a little bit more ivy-like. Time to fit our ivy onto the retaining walls. You can see I've got some very thin twigs here that I've used to create the kind of the main branch structure underneath the ivy. We're not going to see much of this, but I thought it was a nice touch just to have that underneath. I've seen other people use plant roots. If you are using these kind of materials, I tend to give them a zap in the microwave just to kill off anything that's living in them. Then our ivy's just going to sit over the top of that, and we're going to make that kind of nice and flat. And then we might open it up a little bit just so we can see some of that twig structure, but we'll see how that looks. To fix that in place, I'm going to use, again, this is an experiment, I'm going to try some rocket card glue because that's going to dry quite quickly, but I'm also going to give that area a quick blast with some spray glue because hopefully that will kind of help it stick quite quickly as well. So we'll see how that turns out. And I'm being quite aggressive with how I'm holding this against it. Try and get that to stick and to fit really flat against that. Okay, so I'll just leave that to dry. I'll probably go in there with a little bit more glue just to stick some of the edges down. But hopefully you'll agree that that actually looks quite effective. I'll repeat the same on the other section. Okay, so hopefully you can see how creating the ivy has added some real interest onto the retaining walls and other parts of the layout. Now let's move on to thinking about a different topic and sleeper spacing. Those of you who are working in OO or even in HO scale will know that Pico produce bullhead track with what people refer to as a more realistic sleeper spacing when you compare it to the other types of track that are available. Now, the heritage line here on the layout is made using bullhead track. Now, that presents a problem if we're then going to use other types of track for other parts of the layout, and indeed I'm using concrete sleeper track. Now, when you compare those two side by side, the sleeper spacing on the traditional kind of out of the box track does look a little bit odd and a little bit more unrealistic than it might do if I wasn't using the bullhead quite so close to it. So that means that for all my track, I am going through a process that I've seen several other people online using, which is to cut the webbing on the sleepers and to space them out to make them more in line with the spacing on bullhead track. Now, there are some tools available commercially for you to do that. I believe it's Rowe Laser Lines who produce some. But I was interested to know if you could make your own spacers to make that a little bit cheaper and a little bit easier to get exactly what you needed. So let's head over to TinkerCAD and see just how difficult, or easy as the case may be, it is to create your own tools to help you in this process. Here we are back in TinkerCAD again, and I've got an example of what we're going to be building on the screen. It's a very basic shape with some teeth. These gaps in between them are set to the size of concrete sleepers on Pico Code 75 track. If you're using other track, just measure the. I would just measure the size of the sleepers just in case there's any difference. And for Code 75 track, also this kind of depth of these teeth is important. And then these prongs that come down, that is effectively the distance between the sleepers. So if you imagine this kind of slotting over the track with the sleepers fitting into these gaps here. But how do we go about making this? Well, it's really, really easy. We're going to start out again with a cube shape. Let's just drop the size of that. How thick you make these is up to you. I tend to keep them about 5 mil thick. Obviously, the thicker they are, the longer they'll take to print. And yeah, 5 mil gives you a little bit of flexibility if you print these out of PLA as well. So, and then again, how much of a handle you want to hold them is also dependent on you. And then just make the length of them. So that's 150 I've gone for there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take another one of these for our tooth, and we're going to use a duplicate function in a second for them. So for me, I make these 5.25 across, and I make them 5.5, I think it is, high. Okay, so you can see that looks like a tooth. Let's just line that up at this end just so you can see. Now, you can use the align tools here. Let's just show you those. So if we highlight one object and the other, and then we align them with that end, and then we also then we need to align it here. Let me just use Snap to Grid. There we go. That's a bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to make these 9 millimeters apart because that's the gap I like to use. So our Snap Grid is 1 millimeter. So if we duplicate using this button here, or Control D, and then move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There we go. So that's the 5.5. Sorry, I said that wrong. The 5.5. Sorry, the 5.25 width minus the 9 gives you that gap in there, which is right for a sleeper to fit into. Now, the great thing about the duplicate function in TinkerCAD is if you duplicate, you move an object, and then before you do anything else, you hit duplicate, it will then repeat the spacing. So rather than having to move each one of those, we can effectively just hit duplicate, and it will create us this. Then I've made this ever so slightly too long. So again, you can kind of move that in and just kind of align that up. So you don't have to watch me fumbling around. I won't do that now. And then you can highlight everything and group them together. There we go. We made a slightly taller one here. That's now a solid object. As you can see, they're fused together because we aligned them up correctly. And again, we can just go to export, import those in to Cura or our slicing program, and print that on a 3D printer. And it really is that easy to create simple shapes like this. Using this technique, you're free to create spaces of all different sizes. I particularly use the small ones round corners and then the longer ones on the straights. But have a play and have fun. there we have it. Another quite simple project in TinkerCAD. If you would like to kind of start learning maybe some CAD skills, then again, this is another little project that you might want to just kind of maybe try and practice some of your skills on. And the useful thing is you'll get some great tools to help you with your layout if you're going to do sleeper spacing like I am. And I will show you those tools in use in a future video, along with the super elevation that we did last time. For those of you who've been following the channel for a while will know that back near the start of the channel, I did start a feature that I was intending to continue with, looking at some of the YouTube channels that have particularly inspired me on my kind of fairly newly reinvigorated modeling journey. And then I stopped that for a little while. I just kind of forgot to do it, really. I started to see a few other channels taking this concept and kind of really using it as a way of showcasing some of the great community there is here on YouTube and some of the great creators who are sharing their content. So I thought I would kind of jump on that bandwagon and kind of get back to talking a little bit about some channels that I watch and are particularly inspired by. So today I'm going to share two of those with you, and then hopefully be able to share some more in future episodes. So our first channel spotlight today is going to be on Proper Chuffed, and there's going to be a link to that channel in the description and up in the top corner there. Now, Hilton is based in South Africa, and it's been absolutely fascinating to me to see Hilton's journey so far, building a model railway in that part of the world. I think there were two reasons why Hilton's channel really resonates with me. One is that I think sometimes we take for granted the access to the great resources we have here in the UK, for those of you who are based in the UK. And the other parts of the world do have to find maybe more creative ways of kind of being able to pursue their interest in this hobby. And watching Hilton's channel, it's also interesting to see some of the challenges that people go through in other parts of the world with things like load shedding to deal with and things like that. But I think the most inspiring thing for me about Hilton's channel is that, as he says right at the start of his videos, he is a complete newcomer to this hobby. And it has been a great journey so far to see him go through that learning process. And I think also to be really brave to kind of put himself out there in the spotlight and let everyone else see him go through that journey. And I think that's a real inspiration. So if you are someone who may be new to the hobby or maybe thinking about building your first layout, then I would really recommend this channel to see that this is just about getting stuck in. It doesn't matter about the mistakes we make. It's all about having fun. And I think also in a world where there's a lot of criticism floating around in this hobby, particularly at the moment, and Hilton is such a positive person about this hobby and kind of his love of it. And I think that's kind of really inspiring, rubs off on you. So definitely go check out that channel. And the second channel I'd like to talk about today is one that I've only started watching recently. And I've watched a couple of episodes so far, but found it really, really inspiring. So I thought it was something worth highlighting. And that is Dot-Side Scenics. Again, there'll be a link up there and in the description. And for me, this is just an example of how to create the most beautiful dioramas, and most importantly, to look at some of the techniques that you can use for building some of the kind of natural features in our landscape. So I'm going to really enjoy, I think, continuing watching those videos and kind of seeing where they lead. I'm certainly taking inspiration from the one on native hedgerows, and that's something that I'm going to be building for part of the layout here. So if you're really interested in kind of landscaping and scenics, then I'd highly recommend taking a look at that channel as well. And just a quick note, I'm filming this at the beginning of March 2024. So at the moment, my plans are to visit the Basingstoke and North Hampshire Model Railway Show this coming Saturday. I think that's the 8th of March. So if you're there and spot me, please do come up and say hi. My primary reason for going to these shows is really to meet people and chat about the hobby. So please don't feel that you're disturbing me if you do come and say hi. The week after, I have no idea what date that is, I will be at, I'm planning to be at Alexandra Palace with Matt from our Model Railway Club. I'll be there on the Saturday. I realise that will be my first time at Ali Pali, so I don't know how busy that show is. But again, it's going to be great to find out and to hopefully meet some people and to kind of chat. And finally today, I'll talk about an opportunity for you to get involved in the channel a little bit more. Now, when I started the channel, I was kind of expecting that there might be a handful of people who are interested to see me building a layout. We've got to the point now where it is entirely feasible that the channel could reach 1,000 subscribers, which to me is just absolutely mind-blowing, and a huge thank you to all of you who have subscribed and watched and engaged with the channel so far. So if I do reach that point, then I will film a special running session on the layout as it is at that moment in time. And I would like your input as to what I run in that running session. So this is an opportunity for you to add into the comments some of the trains that you would like to see running on the layout. And I will do my very best to try and make that a reality when it comes to the running session. So a couple of caveats. I'm not going to go out and buy anything new, so please don't suggest something that I'm definitely not going to have, because it's not going to be a trigger for me to go out and buy that. I'm going to need to rely on the things that I already have. You'll have seen some of the stock that I have tucked away here in the Light Loco playlist. So please have a browse through that. I also do have a few more steam engines. I have a few more blue era diesels, and I have some kind of sectorization livery diesels that were kind of my models when I was younger. I can possibly get some other models from other members of the family, depending on what you ask for. What I'll do is, based on the order I receive suggestions, if I will kind of respond to you, letting you know whether that's even an option or not, what you've picked. I'll then probably pick about the top 5 suggestions, the first suggestions that I'm able to actually realize. And we'll just kind of give it a go and see how that works out. This might be a terrible idea, given that you don't know everything that I've got, but we'll see how we get on. The caveat to that is that I'll only do this when we reach 1,000 subscribers. So if you're not subscribed and watching, that's a great incentive for you to click that subscribe button and help us get to that point. And then also at the same time, please do suggest something to run in that running session. But I'll leave that with you guys to come up with some ideas. I'll be fascinated to see what you're most interested in. And then we'll see how we get on. Okay, that's it for Track Talk today. I hope you've enjoyed the range of topics that I've covered. If there is something specific you'd like to see me cover in this format of episode, then please do let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to factor that into a future video. Okay, well, I shall catch you all soon. Bye-bye.